Thank you so much.
Thank you, Korva. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
We're going to move on to the next item on our agenda, and I'm going to ask Bill to step off the stage, and I'm going to adjust my notes. And we are going to begin our next session. So if you want to stand up and stretch your legs for about 30 seconds, now would be a good time to do that. I'd like to welcome Michael Cobb and Tom Hjelm to the stage if they are ready.
Good morning. How are you? Pleasure to see you.
You too. Do you need water?
Hey, Gordon. Good to see you.
Do you care for water?
Yes, I do. Because my voice begins to give out after a while.
All right, sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We're going to begin our next session called Policy Vision, Platform Realities. It's been 50 years since the signing of the Public Broadcasting Act, and I so appreciated Vince playing that clip for us, President Lyndon Baines Johnson. And what's been remarkable for me in preparing for this session today is rereading the remarks in full that he made as he signed it. And what struck me is in his signing statements, the remarks seemed both quaint and pointed. And there's one paragraph here I'd like to quote briefly, which was not in that clip. Here's from LBJ. Quote, "For today, miracles in communication are our daily routine. Every minute, billions of telegraph messages chatter around the world. Some are intercepted on ships. They interrupt law enforcement conferences and discussions of morality. Billions of signals rush over the ocean floor and fly above the clouds. Radio and television fill the air with sound. Satellites hurl messages thousands of miles in a matter of seconds. Today, our problem is not making miracles, but managing miracles. We might well ponder a different question. What hath man wrought, and how will man use his inventions?" Lyndon Baines Johnson's answer was public broadcasting, including the organization that was created to shepherd it, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And here with me today to talk about the original vision of public broadcasting and today's realities are two gentlemen I am very pleased to introduce to you. Mr. Michael Cobb, the former commissioner for the Federal Communications Commission. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
And my colleague, Mr. Thomas Hjelm, NPR's Chief Digital Officer. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Michael, would you like to begin with your remarks?
I will. Thank you, Korva and Roshni, for making so many arrangements, and Tom for being here, and my friend Vince, who has done so much for Media Impact funders and so much to really stimulate a national conversation on the future of our media. First, I'd like to share some happy news, and this can't come off in my 3 to 5 minutes. Maybe some of you know this, but right before midnight last night, the White House apparently announced that it would go forward with the nomination of Jessica Rosenworcel as commissioner of the FCC. This is wonderfully good news. I know she has been in this theater probably several times, attuned to your issues. Jessica worked for me when I was commissioner, and was my senior advisor, then went to the Hill and back to the FCC as a commissioner, and got caught up in some very nasty infighting, which we don't need to go in here, but she's about the most qualified person you could possibly get on the FCC, and I hope that her nomination will proceed apace. It's very good news for all of us. 50 years ago, as you remarked, Lyndon Johnson and some far-seeing advisors had a vision. And they had a vision which I think was driven by an understanding that commercial media had fallen short and that investing in public broadcasting could enlighten us more fully and entertain us more excellently, that it would be a wonderful investment, that public media would be more responsive to the needs of localities and communities, better represent and better include diversity, and certainly better address local and national concerns. In short, it was an effort to serve the public interest. Fast forward 50 years, President Trump has declared most of the media enemies. He has announced his intention to defund public media. And meanwhile, his mini Donald FCC, as I call it, is busy eliminating any last vestiges of public interest oversight of our media environment. It's expending a lot of energy to do away with the really open internet and our digital future and making sure that it serves the public interest, and it has opened the doors to a media and acquisition bazaar of the kind that we've probably never seen before at the Federal Communications Commission. To me, no merger acquisition is beyond the realm of possibility. It used to be, I think, 4, 5, 6 years ago, you said, well, that could never happen. Get rid of that assumption. I think anything can happen on that front. So all of which leads to the very real possibility of driving the last nail into the coffin of investigative journalism, real journalism, the news and information that a self-governing society needs if it is going to be successful. Never since I went to the FCC in 2001 have I witnessed so savage an attack. Never have I felt so keenly the urgency of the moment and the need to do something and do something now. And I use that word attack advisedly because I think all of us, or most all of us in this room, are under attack. And our media is under attack, the public media is under attack, and we better wake up to that fact. I spent years at the FCC in support of public media, working with a lot of people in this room, Vince and others, many of the foundations here. I called it the jewel of our American media system. I think it is still a diamond, maybe a diamond in the rough in some ways, because you have been denied in public media the kind of funding that you really need in order to meet the vision that Lyndon Johnson set out. You've never had the resources to do that. But in spite of that, you've come forward with wonderful entertainment on television and unparalleled high-quality news on the radio. But now something more is called for. I think much more is really called for. We cannot judge our success anymore on how we do in that god-awful yearly battle of are we going to give a pittance to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting or are we going to zero it out. Fighting that battle just, it may be necessary to do, but it is so short of what we need to do as an industry and as institutions. So far more additional resources, more programming to support democracy-sustaining issues, more news on public TV, just about more of everything, more locality emphasis, more emphasis on communities. And it means institutions and foundations, and I know there are many of you in this room, and I know on the issues you represent, you're under attack on a lot of non-media issues too, and those obviously have a high priority, but it's always been my belief that until we do something about our media so that it is teeing up those non-media issues for the benefit of the American people, whether it's health or jobs or opening the doors of equal opportunity or the environment or what have you. Some of you have seen me do this before. I'm not going to do it today, but go around the room and ask people what's their number one issue, and I'll get all those different answers. And then my response is, well, I think that's fine and dandy and wonderful to do that, but unless you make some reform of the media and support of public TV and bring some public interest back to commercial, those other issues aren't going to go anywhere until they're teed up for the American people so they can know the facts and understand them and understand how important all of those things are to the future of our country. So I think you guys, foundations and institutions, have done some amazing work in support of good causes. I know some of you are funding a lot of local journalistic startups and experiments. I know my friends at Free Press, I'm on their board, are very much involved in this. Thanks to you. But it goes beyond those specific investments. It goes to the fate and state of the general media ecosystem. It goes to broad policy. And those initiatives need more support because the future is now. And if we can't start a national conversation about these issues, then we are really shortchanging our ability to govern ourselves as intelligent citizens. We've dumbed down the civic dialogue and the democratic dialogue in this country enough to the point where we're already making stupid decisions for the future of the nation, and I don't think that can go on very much longer without really a bad crisis. So what I would urge, I guess, if I was to urge anything, is all of you folks in public media and your supporters to come together to develop a consensus kind of message, a narrative, if you will, and to encourage a national conversation about that, a real showing of unity of purpose. And I think you have a lot of that already, but I think we need more of that in times that are as dangerous as this. And that effort is really the underpinning of sustaining the democracy we have by a media that informs the American people with the news and information they need. And to me, there's no greater imperative in our national policy. There's no greater problem facing the United States of America right now. And you guys are we all are part of the solution.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Tom Hjelm from NPR, our Chief Digital Officer.
Yeah, these are interesting times, all right, for all the reasons that Michael was describing. The policy visions of today are very problematic in many ways, the political climate, the journalistic climate being what it is. And then we get to platforms and the disruptive nature of what's happening on the media landscape, how things are changing, how audience behaviors are changing, audience expectations are changing. So it's my job to, as best I can, try to look ahead, try to look around the corner, try to anticipate what are the changes that, as a media company, NPR and public radio as a whole, needs to be thinking about and how we need to be adjusting ourselves accordingly. But I'll tell you, connecting the dots here, connecting the threads, what Michael was talking about, what Bill was talking about earlier, I think a lot of where I see us going has a lot to do with where we've come from. And when I go back and think about the core principles, the salient characteristics that made public radio and public media special in the first place, and then try to map those core values to where things are going, where the opportunities are, certainly where innovation is going, I see a very nice set of connection points. For example, journalism, obviously. The quality, the credibility, the importance of what we do at NPR and across the public radio system on a daily basis, obviously more important than ever. The quality, the credibility of what we do, that national dialogue, the way that we, in a nonpartisan way, are able to report, bring voices together in ways that really provide not just the breaking news on top of the hour, but the insights, the commentary, the conversation. That is a unique and increasingly special proposition. So thinking about how we channel those journalistic values in new ways on new platforms, we've got a lot to work with. We've got a lot of raw material that I think serves us very well. Number two, the idea that we are a national local network. That too is something very, very special. In an era when local journalism is in an especially dicey position, at a place where, 15% of local news organizations are independently owned and operated? Well, public radio has 264, in effect, local bureaus across the system. And that way that we have of tying together, lashing together the national conversation and the local impact, the local conversations, that's something also that is very, very unique and is a great differentiator, I think, for us in the marketplace. And something, again, from a digital perspective, I think all day about how can we leverage that national local value proposition in new ways across new platforms. So that, too, is a great asset that we have to work with. Number three, audio. I mean, this is a golden age of audio. As my boss, Jarl Mohn, reminds us every 20 minutes or so, radio listening is still going very, very strong, thank you. In fact, the ratings for our two signature tentpole shows, Morning Edition, All Things Considered, are actually at all-time highs. So radio, still going very strong. At the same time, everybody in the world's got podcast fever right now, and public radio is topping the charts. NPR is by far and away the #1 producer of podcasts on the iTunes charts. Ira Glass, This American Life, Serial is #2. My former colleagues at WNYC Studios, #3. We are, the mass market main producers of the most popular podcasts out there. So in terms of content production, we have a lot, again, to work with. We have a huge and ravenous audience. And then also, not only in terms of content production, but content distribution, thinking about the platforms of audio. How can we think in new ways about how audio is consumed? And how can we meet those changing expectations of, the Spotify generation, for example? There, too, I think we have a lot to work with. We've been making a lot of progress, and we can talk more about that in a few minutes. So as a content creator and as a distributor and platform company for audio, there, too, I think we're in a strong place. Finally, the core currency of the public radio economy remains membership, crowdfunding. And when you think about it, we're the original Kickstarter. We invented this stuff. And if you talk to Kickstarter or Patreon or Indiegogo or any of these guys, they will say, one of their models, one of their inspirations as they were thinking about, where to take their company was public radio, public media, public television. So there, too, we kind of invented that, and that unique compact, the idea that our audience has a proprietary interest in what we do, that they invest, that they give money for something they get for free, that is a really unique value proposition. And again, the spirit of that, conveying that and repurposing, reimagining what membership means in a digital context, that too is a great creative challenge. There's a lot of creative energy and innovation that can come around that. So, trust me, none of my friends or loved ones would think of me as being Mr. Optimism, but I actually think we're in a very good place. And I come to this from a position of optimism. We have a tremendous amount of work to do and disruptions and competitors who are barking at the door or right around the next door. But having spent 22 years now in digital media in one form or another, mostly in commercial media, but coming to public media, just realizing every day the assets that we have to work with, the strengths that we come from, I'm actually fairly bullish about where we're going.
Tom, you've talked before about the word disruption and how you hear it in context of the changing media landscape. Would you identify for us what the challenges of disruption are and what the benefits of disruption are?
Sure. Yeah. Well, let me start, again, by going back to the origins of things. I mean, public radio has been able to thrive, first of all, as we've heard from Bill and Michael, for generations now, thanks to the foresight and the wisdom and the protection, really, of President Johnson, the FCC, Congress. I mean, setting aside a protected zone where public media could thrive. Wherever you are, wherever you're traveling, on the FM dial just where to go to get your local NPR station. That's been a really valuable thing, to have that sort of sanctuary within the digital, the media landscape, that protected zone. Well, as you look at the digital well, let's put it, there's no analog to that in the digital world, as it were. So we have no protected place, in the digital spectrum. We're one of, a million websites and apps. We have no particular protected zone. So that is disruptive. We need to think in more intense ways about our competitive space, or where we fit within the marketplace, and what is the value proposition that we have relative to any number of commercial or venture-backed digital companies, media companies, et cetera. So that's one changing of the terms of the game in the digital era. Another thing, as I was saying earlier, that direct compact, the direct relationship that we have with our listener, that is, again, at the core of what has made public radio and public media, what's enabled us to thrive. Again, the great thing about podcasts and on-demand audio is that it's being listened to, and it's got a tremendous reach. It's being heard by millions of new listeners every day. However, most of that listening is happening on third-party platforms. It's happening on iTunes, or it's happening on Spotify or Stitcher or what have you. And so it's great that it's being listened to, reach is there, but that direct, almost transparent relationship that we have with our audience, that is endangered. When most of that listening is happening on a third-party platform, the relationship becomes a bit attenuated. We don't have the direct data, for example. We don't exactly know who that listener is. So that creates new challenges and stresses on our model. I guess another disruption is that in this era especially, when there's a new innovation happening every week roughly, we need to be in a position where we can rapidly respond to changes, anticipate and respond to things. And that, for an organization or a system that is as large as ours, that's not necessarily in our DNA, right, to respond to today's innovations. Yes, we're great at responding to the news, but in terms of responding to the next, the voice-activated platform or the connected home or the Internet of Things, being able to anticipate those things and adjust accordingly, we have some challenges there. Certainly that other smaller, more nimble, maybe venture-backed businesses, have less of that problem. So that's sort of a cultural challenge that we need to adjust to.
Michael, you were talking about fake news. I've seen amazing discourse on social media, particularly on Twitter, and I have seen some horrible insults.
Dear Miss Coleman, why does NPR even pay you? You're so obviously a beginner.
And worse. With this type of dialogue that's out there, Michael, how do we in public media foster and sustain credible civic dialogue?
Well, you could start, I think, with embracing the concept of media literacy a little more holistically than it has been. We don't have a civic dialogue in this country that's worthy of the nation that we are. We don't educate our kids, starting out when they're very young, how to tell the good from the bad, the reliable from the unreliable, the fake from the real. NPR has always done such, public broadcasting, has always done such good work on children's programming. Here's the ultimate children's programming, put on a K through 12 kind of curriculum for an hour or two a day. I urged Chairman Janikowski to do this and others when I was at the FCC. There's something at every age level that you can teach a child. The curriculums at school are so tilted now toward, STEM education. History, which I used to teach years ago, gets lost. Civic responsibility gets lost. I think most of the elements of a curriculum like that are already out there. When I was at the FCC, I would meet with different groups, universities or private groups, public groups, come in and say, we're doing this. Next person would come in and I would say, did you know they're doing that? No, there wasn't a coordination. So I suggested, why don't we get the FCC or the White House or somebody, call all the agencies together and develop a private-public partnership. This would respond to maybe some of the funding needs too, if you could get the private sector involved in this. And that would be a high priority for me, and I think it would be something that would redound to the advantage of public media. That maybe is the next generation of children's programming. Not that I would get rid of what we have now because it's so wonderful, but making room for it on the dial. Fake news, yes, fake news bothers me, but what bothers me just as much is bad news. And I don't mean bad, I mean poor news, lacking news, insufficient investigative journalism. To me, that's fake news too. And the only way to get at that is to really encourage a journalism, as I talked about before, that's reality and not infotainment, to make sure that the public understands that when you get into an election like last time, which was of, by, and for big media, that you have to come at it a different way. You have to have some issues orientation and things like that. Industry needs to be pushed. You hate to just think that your fate is all bound up in algorithms that nobody can understand, that the FCC doesn't really have the opportunity to find out about. So there's a lot we can do, I think, without interfering in the rights of free speech. I mean, there's talk about disruption. I mean, the technology of the internet is disruption, and it's disruptive in bad ways and in some ways that we're only learning how to master. It should be disruptive in good ways. Here's a platform that could be the future town square of democracy, paved with broadband bricks, and now we have a commission that's intent on eliminating the net neutrality rules and turning much of the power of the internet over to gatekeepers, putting power at the center, not at the edges where it's supposed to be and used to be. I could go on, but I mean, that's a
We
few of
should
my
probably talk
thoughts.
about net neutrality in a minute, but I want to touch back on something that you brought up, which was children's programming. You
Right.
know, NPR has just debuted a podcast.
Mhm.
Do you want to talk a little bit?
Wow in
Just
the
for a
world.
second? Wow in the world.
Yeah. I think this is, you have a longer history with NPR than I do, but I think is this our first,
As far
Sure.
as I know.
As far as we know, it's our first-
specifically.
first podcast targeted for younger listeners. And it was the sort of a passion project from Guy Raz, who many of you know is the host of the TED Radio Hour. And it just launched, and so far so great. You know, it's doing really, really, really well. So, you know, I'd say this is part of obviously a larger strategy as to how to engage that younger generation of listeners. And here we're getting to even pre-teens. But again, I see that as a major part of our digital strategy is making ourselves relevant in all different ways, from the voices, from the content, and from the delivery mechanisms of our content to new audiences. While again radio listening is still going very strong, it's also a fact that a huge percentage of listeners in their teens and 20s don't own a radio, and so how do we adopt to that?
Did you bring slides?
I did bring slides. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring a couple.
Can you show me your slides? Show me your slides.
Good. Sure. So I wanted to, I think this ties to some of the themes we're talking about here, but also just shares a little bit of a product demo here. I'm going to talk about NPR One, and I trust many of you are at least familiar with NPR One, which is an app. Well, it started out as a smartphone app. It's now going onto other platforms as well. But this was launched actually 3 years ago this month, NPR One. And again, in the spirit, can we advance? There we go, thank you. Again, in the spirit of reaching back into the core of what are the unique value propositions of public radio, what makes it special, what's in our DNA, and then sort of mapping that to new behaviors and trying to adjust for changing times. NPR One is on one hand a kind of avant-garde listening product, which is personalized and very flexible in terms of your being able to program the experience based on your particular tastes. And yet it's also conservative in the sense that it's drawing upon these core assets of public radio. So the idea behind NPR One, if you're not familiar with it, is that you can personalize your listening experience. So it's based around the segment, taking our content, the linear stream that is the backbone of our offering, and segmenting it, even atomizing that content in such a way that you can piece together essentially your own playlist. It's based on localization, and so if you download NPR One here in Washington, it'll localize to WAMU. That'll become the main brand, and what you'll get is a kind of mix, a blend of national content produced by NPR plus local content produced by WAMU. If you download this in Kansas City, you'll get KCUR, et cetera. And then the great content, again, as I mentioned earlier, that's produced within public radio, not only NPR, but from IRA and WNYC and others. And we're even expanding the value proposition to include other content from other producers as well. But tied to this is, to my earlier point, we want to use things like NPR One to strengthen the direct relationship we have with our audience. And so, in a non-creepy way, this app is able to harvest a certain amount of listening data about who you are, where you come from, what your tastes are, and then use that. And so far, we haven't, I don't think, crossed the line and violated the trust factor that's so important to what we do. But based on that, we can target, we can market, and ultimately engage, and we hope convert to membership that listener. Now, NPR One, as I said, it's almost at this point a legacy product, having been in the market for 3 years, but we're very restless, and we're continuing to optimize this thing in real time. Today's headline is actually the image on the far left, direct pledging. Today, this very day, the 14th of June, we're launching a new pilot which enables you to really pledge with almost one click. We're trying to take the friction out of that membership experience. So in 3 markets, New York, San Francisco, Chicago, we have this sort of integrated pledge function. That's really exciting. We're adding more local content. But then beyond the smartphone, again, this thing started as a smartphone app, but it is now multiplying across the digital landscape. So it's on connected cars, it's on wearables, it's coming soon to a refrigerator near you, the connected home. And then in the last 6 months, the smart speaker happening has really taken hold. There's an Alexa skill for NPR One. It's on Google Home. And then last week, you may have heard Apple announced its new entry into the smart speaker sweepstakes, which is the HomePod. And NPR, we're working very closely with Apple to make sure that NPR and public radio is well represented there. So lots going on with the NPR product. But to me, what's significant, and where NPR One really gets meaningful and exciting and scalable, is, yes, there's the NPR One product, the thing that you interact with, but underneath NPR One is a suite of services. Very non-sexy, but really important stuff, like hosting and infrastructure, identity management, data collection, membership tools, publishing tools. Making these, NPR One has given us sort of the impetus to develop a suite of services that can in turn be extended and made available to other partners across the public radio system. So I notice Jennifer is here. The Knight Foundation has been extremely generous over the last few years in getting us this far. But there's great potential in taking these infrastructure supporting tools and scaling them even further so that they can be used not only for NPR's product purposes, but for, again, all the innovators across the system, of which there are many.
Thanks, Tom.
I like the red, white, and blue on the pledging card. Is that a coincidence that that's launched on Flag Day?
Exquisitely timed. That was all intentional.
We're going to get to audience questions in a moment, but I want to touch back on something that you were speaking of, Michael, and that had to do with net neutrality, but also net neutrality in context of the larger question, which is media, civic engagement, and democracy. And I'll allow you to tie those 3 together instead of...
Well, I think, first of all, net neutrality, to simplify, means that everybody in this room and everybody else has equal access and equal rights on the internet, and your internet service provider is not allowed to slow or throttle or displace or block content, and is not allowed to favor its own affiliates or allies or the affluent and provide them with fast lanes that everybody else is denied. So this is to me, the entrance question on the open internet. This is not how we deal in total with the open internet, because it's just one problem. Unfortunately, we're playing ping pong as administrations change and going back and forth, and we're just debating this one issue about net neutrality. And let's all hope that that the open internet rules passed by the Wheeler Commission continue. And I think they have a chance of that in court, but I would hesitate to predict what's going to happen. But without that kind of open internet, the garage innovator, and they're still out there, or anybody in this audience with a website or a thought, is hostage to the gatekeepers. And the gatekeepers are becoming so big, it used to be just the content people. Now the distributors, ISPs are in the content. You can't tell one company apart from the others. And the future, without some sort of public policy to harvest the awesome potential of the internet, is very, very cloudy. As I said before, this could be our home for a really true civic dialogue. This could be our home if we can develop a model on the internet, which we don't have right now, for news and journalism. If we could raise the resources that public media needs to not only support its traditional programming, but its internet programming too. It boggles my mind that companies like the big internet companies, Google or Facebook, can run all of the news on TV, and so many people go there to get their news, and they've got ads on each side that are making them millions and billions of dollars. And why doesn't some of that go back into journalism and supporting other kinds of media? I don't know, but I do know, unless we get back to the concept of the public interest, unless we have some guidelines for commercial programming, unless we seriously support public interest oversight and put money into public media, we're playing really fast and loose for the future. And you can see the internet going down the same road that radio and TV and cable went. And I think a lot of people 15 years ago thought, oh no, that's never going to happen. This fella Cops, he's an old timer. He's talking about radio and television and cable, and we're going to consign all that stuff to the ash heap of history. And it wasn't until about 2014 or so, 15, more people on the internet now, a confluence of issues with some big media mergers coming at the same time that the courts threw out the initial net neutrality rules. And I think a lot of people began to see, ooh, that's my communication system they're talking about. I am involved in this. I have a stake in this future. And that's why 4 million people ended up writing to the Federal Communications Commission in favor of something as arcane sounding, not just net neutrality, but Title II net neutrality. I mean, does that term inspire anybody?
It's not quite that sexy.
I don't think so, but so important. But we have to get that settled, and then move on to what do you do about the commercialization of the internet, which is another issue. What do you do about consolidation? What do you do about the larger questions of what does the internet mean for the future of all of us in this room? How are we going to work? Are we going to work in the future? Those are really important. But we're just back and forth, net neutrality, net neutrality, net neutrality. We've got to win that one and get it done, and then move on to some of the larger questions.
We need to take a little time because I want to ask the audience if they would like to ask some questions.
Sure.
So, do we have questions? Yes.
Thank you. Carol Pickering with Deedle Partners. I'd be curious to get your thoughts about public broadcasting's role in the realm of greater customization, curation of news and media, and what that means for civic engagement, democracy.
Yeah, this is something we think about a lot, obviously. With products like NPR One, I think we're trying to walk a balance, I'd say, between giving the audience the customization, the level of personalization that increasingly audiences expect these days. You go to a website, you download an app, you expect it to know something about who you are, and you expect it will give you the freedom to personalize the experience, according to your tastes and preferences. That's great. The consequence, though, if you take that to an extreme, is that you find yourself in a bubble, right? You're only getting what you asked for. You're only hearing the voices that probably echo your own voice. And so that's necessary from an audience perspective, from just being a credible, popular product. But we also need to give the audience not only what they wanted, but what they need to hear. And so finding that balance is a real challenge. It's a technical challenge, it's a creative challenge, it's an editorial challenge, balancing these two voices. Not only what you want to hear, but again, something that fans of public radio really love is that idea of serendipity. Hearing something that you didn't know was there to be heard, and so giving that surprise element is also an important part of our curation strategy. I could also say that while on-demand listening, podcast listening is, again, very rabid these days, I'm not sure anybody has really cracked the nut of creating a great discovery experience around on-demand audio. If you know what you're looking for, iTunes is great. But in terms of referring you, exposing you to new voices, that too is probably there's a weakness in the market right there. And so that too is something that we're trying to take on with NPR One as we take our curatorial mojo, the trusted editorial voice that we have, and apply that to the broader landscape of on-demand listening. So we'll do the job of as best we can of covering the landscape and giving you what we think you need to hear.
I wanted to add a thought to the previous question and stimulating that national dialogue and doing some of these things I'm talking about. This is not a new and novel approach. This is something that concerned the founders of this country back in George Washington and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson's day. Here they were presiding over a very fragile experiment in almost a continental-wide republic. No electronic, no internet, no telegraph, no phones, no radio. How do they inform those citizens with the information they needed to make intelligent decisions for the future of the company? That's why they subsidize the construction of postal roads. That's why they subsidize the mailing of newspapers. It's the largest expense of government, these things, up until the Civil War era. So it's nothing new. It's based on the realization that democracy cannot survive unless you have an informed electorate. Now, those newspapers that they were subsidizing and sending out were not nonpartisan, objective, Pulitzer Prize winning journalism. They were propaganda sheets. Well, it was the best we had. And at least there were news, and you'd let go with all kinds of them, no matter which side of the political spectrum it was on. So this is something as old as the Republic. You can bring it up to public media and the realization that we needed more than we had. It's always there, that appreciation that without that kind of news and information, real news and information, not fake news, self-government cannot be successfully practiced.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
Hello, I'm Joseph Tavares. I'm the Chief Content Officer at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Big NPR fan, let me start off. I live in Boston, 2 stations, I'm member at both. I do think, I just want to remind my fellow funders in the room that public radio is much bigger than just NPR. And I think there's a part of the conversation that we haven't had yet. And I just want to remind folks that there are 18 radio stations at HBCU campuses. Some of those are not NPR stations. There are a number of stations across the Southwest and actually on the East Coast that broadcast in Spanish, not NPR stations. There are radio stations on Indian reservations. And I think sometimes when we think, we forget that it's a much bigger world than just NPR. But again, I'm a big fan. I just think it's important that we should note that. Thank you.
That's a point very well taken, but it's also instructive on the number of allies and the number of people with similar interests who exist out there. And I'm talking about getting a message, a consensus kind of message, unity of purpose, spreading as widely as possible. So bringing all of those people under the tent, as your comment just did, is absolutely essential.
I'm going to conclude by thanking both Tom Hjelm and Michael Copps for joining me
Thank
here
you.
on stage today.
Enjoyed it. Appreciate it. Thank you for your questions. Nice to see you. Good luck to you.